Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Gene Alloway, the proprietor of the famed used and rare bookstore Mott and Bailey here in Ann Arbor. Welcome to Rip Rap, Gene.
Thank you.
I think you already know my fondness for this store, and the two of us have had some fascinating discussions on a wide range of topics over the years. I wanted to do this interview so I could learn even more about you and the role of academic literature in your life. So, for example, what is your personal history with academic books?
Well, I came from a small town in Kansas that had no bookstore whatsoever.
Oh,
And the owner of the grocery store had a little gift shop, and she had some paperbacks there. So I basically read paperbacks. And of course, we went to our library, public library. But when I went into college, my background was in classics. And so you can't avoid academic books and classics. And even today, classics majors of all the undergraduate degrees generally have bigger libraries than almost every other undergraduate degrees, except maybe English majors. But I even ran a library out of my dorm room, the H. Beam Piper Memorial Library and Reading Room. He was a science fiction writer I liked, and I still have my library card that we created for other guys in the scholarship hall, is what it was called. But then I, became a librarian and an academic librarian, and then again, there they are.
well, why did you decide to become a librarian?
I majored in classics, as I said, but my Greek was so terrible I knew I couldn't continue because I wanted to go into Byzantine history. And my Latin was much better, but the Byzantines didn't speak much Latin. They were Greek. So I knew I wouldn't get much further there. So I made pizzas for a year, invented a sandwich, and decided that was the pinnacle of my career in pizza making. So I decided on librarianship because I'd always loved books. And it was a career you could get a job at. But I've always enjoyed being in libraries, and I love the process of choosing books and putting books in front of people.
Now, as a librarian, when you go into a library, what are you looking for?
These days it's more about the people. I like to watch the reference desk. I want to see if they know more than just what comes up on the computer screen, because there's an awful lot more than what comes up on the computer screen. So I want to see what kind of tricks they know. For instance, many reference desks these days are low. But the problem with that is when you're looking at a computer and you're sitting low, people won't talk to you. So I used to have students who worked with me say, stand up for 5 minutes. You want to change your stats? Stand up for 5 minutes. And you would. People would approach you. People are polite. They don't want to bother you. Same way in the store. I probably have my nose on the computer too much here. But if you are actively looking around and open to being approached, you will be.
It's a kind of conversation, really, about what's going on.
It is. But it's also knowing what someone needs before they articulate it, because they're there in the library for a reason, and that fine line between approaching a librarian or a bookseller and not, it's very narrow.
So you worked at the University of Michigan Library. Is that the only library you worked at before?
I worked at several libraries there. I worked at the undergraduate library, engineering library, and then the graduate library. And but yeah, that's the only library job. I had a couple other offers, but they never were quite as good. And I like Ann Arbor, and it was a good book town, and I had my friends. And so I never really, there wasn't another job that would pull me away. So so I was there from '89 to 2006.
And why did you start, or how did the decision to start a bookstore evolve?
Well, before you start a bookstore, you have to think about selling books. So I'm going to start with that. I was hitting rummage sales I don't know why, just because it was interesting. And I went to a sale where there were a lot of photography books, and I bought them, and I took them to Dawn Treader here in town, and I made more money than I spent. So I had enough money for lunch, for the books that I wanted to keep, for my gas, and to cover the cost of the books I sold. And so I figured that was a pretty good deal. So I started doing that, selling to other bookstores here in town as what they call a book scout. But I met a gentleman by the name of Don Cram. And Don Cram was a former engineer. He worked on the Mariner missions to Mars. But he had gotten older, and his health wasn't the greatest. And he had semi-retired and was hunting books, but a real smart dumpster diver. He once fished out a Greek and Latin 17th century dictionary literally from the trash. And so he told me about the internet. He told me about, I knew about the internet, but he told me about how to sell on the internet, where some places were. And I, as an academic, you might remember Usenet, Rec Arts Book Marketplace. That's where I first started selling. And he told me something that is true to this day, to any booksellers. That is, when you're selling online, your reputation is all you have to differentiate yourself from other people. So he was a really good mentor. And so when I'd been doing that for a while, started listing online, selling on eBay, etc., stuff like that, I met a gentleman at work, and I had a buddy back home. We'd all talked individually and together about a shop. And so in 2000, at the beginning of 2000, we decided to make it a reality. And we started casting about for places. And over here on Ann Street, there were a number of offices, but there was also an open shop, open space. And the landlord took a little bit of talking to, but he accepted the idea. He said, bookstore might be good. And so we built our shelves and pooled our money and gathered the books and opened the shop in October of 2000. And so there were 3 of us then. And it was fun selling on the internet, but a bookshop, it's simply easier to sell books in a bookshop than it is online. So less work. But the other thing is, books come to you easier in a bookshop as well. But it's much more of the human aspect. If you're selling on the internet, it's hard not to get into the widget mindset. It's hard. And so because you really are just packaging and stuff. So the bookshop was intriguing to us because it was a community setting, a social setting, as well as a place that offered more business opportunity than the internet alone.
So what are some of the specific stories with dealing with people and books in the bookstore?
Well, a general story that pops up every now and again is estates. But what I always tell people is one of the things they don't tell you when you open a bookshop is how to deal with grief. And you often deal with families who either not so long ago, maybe a few years, have lost somebody, and these books represent part of them that remain. They sometimes represent relationships that are broken. They represent, in the case of some scholars' wives, you're dealing with the collaborator, the uncredited collaborator of some of these works. And so there's been more than one occasion where I said, call me when you're ready. I don't think you're ready. And that's okay, unless you absolutely have to be out of the house. And I've had people tell me they've thrown booksellers out of the house because they were just treating the book, grabbing them off the shelves. But they are, the books are more than just things, and especially in a town like this. So that's a particular thing that comes up once in a while. The other thing is someone comes in and they don't know what they have. And there's 2 ways that can go. The horror story is that the person sells what they have for chump change to a bookseller, who then sells it for an enormous amount of money and is a real jerk, etc. But for me, the fun part is telling them what they have And part of that's the librarian, and I want to find out myself, and part of it is sharing that information. So we've had a Mormon Bible come in that I sold for someone for $44,000.
Wow.
And then, 4 years later, we had a Doctrines and Covenants, which was a very early Mormon book that was geared toward the elders. Someone walked in, and all they wanted was an appraisal because they were going to give it to the Plymouth Historical Society, and I sold it for them for $60,000.
Wow.
I had a person come in with a vellum document written in ink. There was an article in the Ann Arbor News about it. It was signed by Kaiser Wilhelm himself, for the second, and it was making a particular gentleman, Stolberg, Wernigerode, Prince of the Empire, and with this gorgeous, gorgeous heraldry painted on the vellum. And it had been sent over by a private in the Army, not of his family. He said his dad had it forever, and his dad was, I think, a dentist who had gone to estate sales and auctions and stuff like that. And in my research, I realized that this would have had a stamp, a seal, and it would have been in a box, and it would have had a couple other small things. But all those were missing. But the man had sent the seal and the book home, so the seal was not with the book either, and the family didn't have that. So in the course of my research, I made sure I reached out to news organizations, so the Ann Arbor News picked it up. But I did some research, contacted some German libraries, and they weren't particularly helpful. But we still weren't ready to sell it. I was still doing some research, and I put a price tag on it of somewhere around $15,000. And I thought that was a little conservative, so I wasn't ready to let it go yet. Just absolutely stunning. The guy who did the heraldry was one of 3 official heraldry painters, and he even wrote a book on heraldry painting as a profession in German in the 1890s. And I get an email from the great-grandson of the prince, who the document belonged to, in Germany. And it turns out that the family had property on what became both East and West Germany, with the main holdings just across the border in East Germany. And the family holdings had been pillaged, at first a bit by Americans, but then more heavily by other Germans and Russians in the Cold War era. So he had already brought other stuff back. He had found and brought back to the family at auction houses and stuff. So we started a correspondence, and it turned out it was most likely loot, but I was able to exonerate the U.S. Army because this gentleman who bought it in Berlin wasn't there until after 1950 and had already been in East Germany for 2 years. So probably a Russian or maybe an East German had stolen this from the library and sold it for American currency up in Berlin. And it went back to him. And the owner, I warned him that this might be a possibility, and he was perfectly fine with it. And so I have a picture of the gentleman holding the book in his hands, and eventually I got a letter from the Saxon-Anhalt Library, State Library, saying it had been placed there. And I'm now working on another thing of a nightly level that probably isn't loot, but it came with its box and stamp, and so I'm going to do a little bit of research on that and ask this German prince if he knows anything about the family. But this probably is going to be much harder to track because the person of this other document was much lower down on the social standing, whereas this was Bismarck's right-hand man. That's who this guy was that I had the princely document for.
Well, that leads me into one of the fascinations I have with bookstores, which is that's the point where the writers and the readers intersect. It is that personal kind of interaction, both collecting the books and the writing of the books and trying to get them out. And that's a really important function in academic literature, too, is the interchange between author and reader.
Right. Right. Well, The other thing I like about having the bookstore is there's a lot of people who have read books I haven't, that know whole swaths of writing that I don't. And I get a lot of feedback. Someone will tell me, this is a good book, I've been looking for it, or I saw you had this book, it's really good, you know, you don't see it that often, etc. And so that lets me, you know, tell someone else about that book from a source that I trust. And what I found in Ann Arbor is, especially in terms of academic books, is a lot of people who are very interested in a subject, even if they don't have even a bachelor's degree. They've read the basic stuff. They don't want yet another survey, unless it really is different. They're starting to narrow down, and that's where I can start suggesting more scholarly books, more academic books, and that's where I think some bookstores, new bookstores, and some publishers underestimate the American reading public. I've had, you know, people from all sorts of walks of life be interested in amazingly detailed subjects, and so I hope that gets at your question there. But the readership for these academic books is wider than you might think. We've had a couple authors come in: Robert Citino, who wrote some books on German military history; Don Faber, who's written some books published by the University of Michigan Press on Michigan history. And all sorts of people show up. All sorts of people. All sorts of people.
See, I happen to think that academic literature is one of the most exciting literatures around. It's not dull or boring or tedious. It really is dealing with some deep stuff in an informed way. I mean, the good stuff is that way.
Right, right.
You know, and it's intriguing to me to walk in this bookstore and see how much of that kind of stuff you've got.
Well, it's because of Ann Arbor. But, you know, people forget, you know, Confederacy of Dunces was an LSU publication. You know, that's a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. Wesleyan in Nebraska, of all places, are retranslating Verne. Outstanding editions. You know, the best translations, period. I wouldn't recommend anything before 1990 because of these two publishers. Nebraska has some great poetry coming out of it. Nebraska, I can't say enough about them. They've been winning many awards, like 3 out of the last 4 or something like that, or 3 out of the last 5 on baseball history. You know, they've been winning. They write the greatest baseball history, and it's accessible. You know, it's not, you know, stats or obtuse social histories of baseball. These are good histories, and so it's things like that. And maybe they're trying to appeal more broadly, but they do more than they realize, and so it is very exciting to see this sort of stuff. You know, and I just don't see it in mainstream publishers. So I completely agree.
Well, I teach writing, and so one of the types of classes I teach are research, and I tell them, you know, academic research allows you to go underneath and see the underlying dynamics. And when you do that, it doesn't matter what your specific moment is. It'll be exciting because you're seeing the interchange, the interaction of what's going on that resulted, you know, in the situation.
And, you know, you see that when you get a bunch of books on one subject come in, too. I don't care what the subject is. If someone brings me 25, 30 books on one subject, there's going to be some academic books in there. And across the board, I'm like, huh. You know, I don't care if it's ghosts and paranormal, or if it's poetry criticism, or, you know, food history on Italian food. I mean, it just, all of a sudden, there's much more here than I thought. Much more here than I thought. And it touches a lot more things than I thought.
Like, what's a specific example?
Well, a woman, a librarian, passed away here in town. I never met her, but I bought 800 books on ghosts from her estate. Victorian fiction through modern, modern ghost tales. So it was mostly fiction. But in order to work through it, I needed to know who were the strong ones, and I picked up one of the books in her collection. Three books in her collection were on bibliographies. And reading those, it made me see all these nuances in what she was collecting And sometimes you really want to talk to the collectors to see what they were seeing in their books, and sometimes you don't have the chance. But these reference books, which were scholarly books, were very helpful in that. They let me see the nuances of these writers and maybe why she had these writers and where they fit in with each other and how they built on each other. And things that she might have, she almost certainly already knew herself. She'd given talks about her books, evidently. But the books themselves helped me communicate with her, even though she was past. So sort of mediumship through books.
I tell my students, Western culture sees things in binary, visible, invisible. Ancient cultures know about the in-between space, or the presence of people still is there long after they've passed.
Yeah.
And form, an influence. One of my favorite authors that way is Wole Soyinka from Nigeria. In his plays, as you probably know, he has those presences in the plays. And it's a fascinating thing. I think it's a much more sophisticated way of looking at the influences.
Well, you see those. An individual book is an artifact of that, but a collection of books from a person and the way they're put together is almost a resonance of that person, more than an artifact. It has something beyond itself. The sheer collection is saying something, and more than the sum of the parts. And that's something you can't, as a bookstore, you can't keep them together, but you sort of have a privilege of seeing that for the last time, and before they're broken up. I actually tried to sell that ghost collection in Toto without breaking it up, but so many libraries had parts of it they really couldn't justify buying the entire thing, even though a couple were interested. And I sold a couple items to them each, but it's very difficult to keep a collection together like that.
Well, and there's a respect for the passion,
Right.
for the motivation to do something like that. It's really quite magnificent.
Yeah, yeah. And what some people don't realize is if you do give to a library these days, chances are they're going to break it up anyway, unless you give an awful lot of money with those books.
You have some books here.
Yeah. These are books that I find interesting, but one of them is actually going to be mine, but the other ones I just love to get in the shop. This is from Princeton, Stalinist Science, and that's very interesting to me because it's much more politically laden. I mean, not to say American science isn't, but here it's ideology. It's oppressive. 5-year plans and things like that. So it's very interesting. And Princeton did a fantastic job with this. And it's highly thought of, and
The author is.
yeah, and the book as well.
I'm trying to get you to say the name of the author.
The author is Nikolai Krometsov, and he is senior researcher at the History of Science at St. Petersburg, Institute of History of Science. And what I liked about this book was it's at a really good period between the fall of 97, so before, after the fall of the Soviet Union, but before Putin basically tries to turn it back into a czarship, So a really nice book from the Russians about their science, and Princeton, they have some strong history of science credentials. This book is very recent from Cambridge, quite a bit of heft, as I like. It's on Napoleon. The Franco-Prussian War of 1813. This is volume 2 of it. Michael Legier, who's an up-and-coming scholar. That's the other thing that's fun, is either the person in the shop or sometimes just being on a mailing list of a university press. You get to see these new scholars just do amazing stuff. And you can either see how they've built on somebody else or corrected somebody else or just added to the conversation in some way. And they always... They find these nooks and crannies that people have overlooked, and he's definitely one of them. I love his work.
Changing the notion of who Napoleon was.
Right. What it does is and he's not clouded by either love or hate of Napoleon, So he uncovers some new strengths of Napoleon, while at the same time also showing some of the weaknesses in the Napoleonic system, and in certain times his arrogance in the face of coalitions. And this other book here, this is from Boydell. Boydell, I don't know if it's still Boydell and Brewer. This is just Boydell. Anglo-Norman Castles, edited by Robert Lydiard. This is a collection of articles. And my one gripe with some university press books, when there are anthologies of scholarly work like this, is the title is very tangential to some of the articles that are in there. This is not the case with this particular book. It's nicely focused, and sometimes it can be a bit of a reach on some of the books. But we love medieval history here. Mott and Bailey's, of course, a type of Anglo-Norman castle itself. And so we do love medieval history. But Boydell is a good example, like Four Courts out of Dublin, of these small foreign publishers who are picking up the slack. There's nothing quite like them here in the States anymore. And that's a shame. But they do some really, really outstanding scholarly stuff. And they, again, cover niches that occasionally a trade press used to do, or even some university presses here, but just don't do anymore.
I must confess I have a fascination for castles.
Well,
And there's a lot of them in this country,
Yes.
you know. And I've got a book on American castles. But there's one in Death Valley, for example.
There's one over here on the northwest side of town. Someone's made a facade on front of their house. That's a castle. It's fun to look at Christmas.
It's just, you know, these huge constructions. There's one in the was it Lawrence River? They're all over the place in this country, which I find, you know, quite an anomaly. You know, that there'd be castles in a country that was against royalty and that kind of construction.
Well, I think that's partly bookish too. There's this revival, partly led by William Morris in the 1890s, for medieval craft. And it wouldn't surprise me if you looked at some of these buildings that they're from 1870s up. And in some cases, it might have even been Robert Burns that inspired somebody. But there's an interesting relationship between this medievalist movement out of the late 1800s and architecture in both America and England. This romanticized view of the Middle Ages, which you see in some books illustrated by Howard Pyle, for instance. You know, Pirates and Knights, 1890 to 1910.
Well, thank you for being on Rip Rap. It's been quite an interesting discussion.
Well, thank you. It's always fun to talk books. I talk people's ear off in the store all the time. I have to be careful I don't get them parking tickets.
Thank you, Gene.